Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. With the major season 5 update within Warzone, we of course saw a pretty significant meta update. We saw a lot of changes to actually a bunch of different weapon categories. For the past couple of seasonal updates, it feels like there hasn't been like a really significant amount of weapon changes. Just what they have been changing are, larger and a bit more drastic. But with the season 5 update, we saw a bunch of different changes to a bunch of different weapons, and a lot of them trend in a very positive direction, which definitely is a good thing. This is something that Call of Duty has talked about doing and Raven has talked about doing for a little while now, and it seems like they are finally getting around to fully balancing and I guess sort of fully fixing the meta. I don't know if that's the proper term for it, but it's definitely a big step in the right direction. I wanted to sort of detail why that is just outright. So when we go to the patch notes page here for season 5, of course, in the coming weeks, we're going to see even more weapon updates. It seems like Tuesdays, oftentimes they do drop random patch notes, and a lot of times we could see weapon updates with those. So of course, we'll be keeping an eye on those week-to-week updates as they happen, and if anything significant changes, or on a weekly basis as is, I'm already covering all the new updates that drop. So if you want to guarantee you're in the know, you're in the loop for everything as it's happening, right as it's happening, be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on those post notifications, and if you enjoy this video, a like rating is always seriously appreciated. But just outright, when you just look at the assault rifle category in general, the first huge positive takeaway from these notes is that what you're seeing here is all buffs. This is a conversation that we've had time and time again over the past few months about how every single time we see a solid weapon within Warzone sort of surface, if it's a new LMG like the DG58, let's say, for example, when that sort of reaches the top of the long range meta, we're like, okay, DG is the meta, we'll use this for a couple of weeks. And then the next major update that rolls around, it gets nerfed really hard, it gets nerfed into the ground, then you never see the DG58 again, right? This has happened time and again throughout the year so far, and so these talking points started to surface saying, hey, why is it that every single major update, we're just constantly nerfing the top dogs? Why is it that weapon A hits the top of the meta and then it gets nerfed into the ground and it no longer exists? Weapon B replaces weapon A at the top of the meta, nerfed into the ground, no longer exists. Why instead do we not find a nice sort of middle ground of what the meta should be like, and then maybe slightly nerf weapon A and buff weapons C, D, 4, 5, so on and so forth? And so now, sort of started with season 4 reloaded, we saw a lot more buffs rather than nerfs, and we're seeing it again here. MCW, slight buff. SVA, slight buff. BAL 27, more significant buff. MTZ, slight buff. M4 from MW2, decent buff as well. And what's interesting here is that it seems like in previous updates, things like the SVA, which has been a top meta contender for some time now, things like the MTZ being a top meta contender for some time now, these would never see additional buffs, but instead, while these are already really good, they just became slightly even better just across the board for however you want to approach kitting these out. Now, of course, these aren't universal buffs. It's more geared towards its close range with the SVA or the mid range with the MTZ, but instead of taking these weapons and making them feel more like pea shooters because they were decent and more players were gearing up with these rather than other obscure rifles, they've just made these now more competitive with the general long range meta, which absolutely is a win, especially when you take into consideration what's dominating certain metas, right? Like for instance, with the rifles here, snipers are great in long range right now, the cat and the car, and so when you have stronger fully auto guns, it balances out everything there. So the assault rifle category sees some huge buffs and some big W's there. The battle rifle category, again, things that you probably didn't expect. While yeah, the BAS-B and the TAC-V, not super popular weapons, probably didn't need to see updates, we buffed them because why not have an additional option there? We've talked about the TAC-V being a just absolutely nuts TTK option, despite the fact that it's a little bit clunky and awkward to use, and instead of taking this broken TTK potentially and nerfing it for no reason, even though it's not a popular weapon, they said, hey, we know it's good, but why don't we just buff it a little bit more? Maybe it gets more people using an old MW2 gun. The SMG category, I won't lie, is the only one that with this update I'm a little bit confused by, but at the same time there's positive takeaways from this too. Really the only issue here is that the Superi and the Horus were clearly and objectively the #1 and #2 SMGs for the past little while, and the Horus got a decent nerf that brings it more in line with things like the Wasp 9 or the Striker. so on and so forth. The Supri, though, only got a movement nerf and not a damage nerf, and this thing's damage is pretty crazy. It's a better rifle than some rifles. It's a ridiculously strong SMG in terms of TTK, so to not see a major nerf to the Supri while the Horus was getting checked just doesn't make much sense. I feel like that makes this more of a monopoly meta, where the Supri is clearly the best choice in some cases, right? But outside of that being a strange update, we saw more positive takeaways, especially when it comes to weapon variety here. The close range is dominated by MW3 guns, and while they chose some interesting ones here to buff, the mini Bach, which was objectively one of the worst guns in the game, got some buffs. Now, it's not going to make the mini Bach the new #1 SMG, but people will now use the mini Bach and say, hey, maybe this is actually a little bit more competitive rather than, oh my gosh, this is the biggest piece of trash I've ever picked up. I'm never touching this again, right? Same with the P90, a weapon that no one really pays attention to. Hey, now, while it's not going to be a #1 SMG, if you're looking to have maybe some more fun, try out a weapon you haven't used in a while, maybe the store has a new blueprint that you're a big fan of, and it's for the P90, you've got a reason to actually use this now. The Vel 47 was already on the verge of being at least a competitive SMG, buffed it, so now it actually is truly in a competitive conversation, and the Vaznev may be the best MW2 sub, the only thing contending against MW3 subs, even better now as well, so you actually have an MW2 sub challenging MW3 subs at the top of the list, so positive takeaways there too. LMGs, kind of an interesting one. Again, we saw a slight nerf to the Holger, which I think you could consider as that #1 long range option, but it wasn't a super significant one. It really just values you hitting upper body shots rather than lower body or lower torso shots, right? So if you're accurate, this is still going to be a phenomenal choice, but now we also have a slightly more competitive Bruin, a slightly more competitive base Peeling Yacht, a really competitive TAC Eradicator, and a slightly better Evolver. Those were already on the verge of being decent options as is, especially like in Resurgence gameplay where their first damage ranges are ridiculously good. So rather than just simply killing the Holger and saying, okay, use whatever's next in line, we actually just get things more competitive and a solid balance across the board there too. And then they just had like some obscure random changes to like the Reclaimer, the fire rate on the core, nothing too crazy there. But really the main takeaway, the main talking point here is that they're doubling down on something they said they were interested in doing some time ago, and it really is very healthy for the overall meta, and that is focusing more on buffs and actually promoting weapon diversity rather than having 1 or 2 top options that consistently get nerfed into the ground season after season and then are just replaced by 1 or 2 more top options. It's no longer this rinse and repeat, you know, cycle in, cycle out sort of system. Instead, it's, hey, while this might not be the true #1 option, it's still right up there if you're super comfortable, but you may want to check out this rifle or this SMG because it's creeping up slowly but surely. So the meta is absolutely trending in a positive direction right now. It's a bit of a bummer that it's taken 5 seasons for it to get to this spot, but hopefully this is a trend that then continues into Season 5 Reloaded and then into Season 6, even though that's kind of going to be an awkward season with Black Ops 6 right around the corner, but then also ultimately into Black Ops 6 Warzone as well. Once that integration takes place, hopefully it's not a, okay, new year, we gotta forget everything. #1 option, you're nerfed into the ground. Hopefully they continue with this, hey, we know what the general TTK should be between the close range and the long range. We know the general balance there. Let's aim to have this many rifles hover around that TTK for the long range, and this many SMGs hover around that TTK depending on how you build out their sprint to fire and their ADS and everything there too. I think we've learned a lot this year in terms of what the meta balance should look like, and now they're fully implementing these changes. So definitely an interesting meta update here across the board. Would love to get your guys' thoughts on this down in the comments below between our new weapons and then what changed with this patch. What are you keeping an eye on? What weapons are you maybe enjoying a bit more here? If you did enjoy the video, a like rating is always really appreciated, and if you're new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button on your way out. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.